think there are three facets, Mr. Horton, I want you to consider. The IEA had also said that they'd achieved 60% enrichment, that you need about 80% or 90% enrichment to actually have a bomb. So that's one factor of it. The second one is the snapback sanctions that happened just during the UN General Assembly that was going on. So that means you've lost that chain of custody because IEA inspectors can't come in once the sanctions are there. And the third is also sort of like the belligerent statements coming out of Netanyahu's office, where he said that they could come up with intercontinental ballistic missiles. We've also seen Iran's sort of ballistic missile production as well, and they are capable. I mean, they did overwhelm Israel's air defenses. So a bunch of these statements and a bunch of these facts that have also aligned over here, one does fear that this could be the next flashpoint in Iran-Israel war. And if that were to happen, can Israel do it without America's intervention and America's help over here?
Okay, well, a lot there. So first of all, on the 60% enriched uranium, as you note, that's still far short of weapons grade. They could have continued to enrich. That is, when we say percent uranium, we mean uranium-235 isotope. That's the sweet stuff that you use for your energy program or your weapons program there. So 60%, if it's not weapons grade, but it's far above electricity grade or medical isotope grade, which is 20%, then what's the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of it was as a bargaining chip to negotiate away. This uranium can be diluted back down again to the proper percent to burn in your centrifuges, to burn in your nuclear reactors. So if you go back and look at the timeline, you'll see that in December of 2020, the Israelis, using the MEK communist terrorist cult, assassinated the director of Iran's nuclear program, a man named Fakhrizadeh, with a remote-controlled machine gun, actually. Then, at that time, that was when they began enriching up to 20% again. And then, which is still technically explainable for civilian purposes. You need that for targets for your medical isotope reactor. So that is for radiation for cancer treatment, or for, they do like the radioactive dye that you can put in, they can see your circulatory system and stuff, that kind of thing. So, but then in April of 2021, the Israelis did a sabotage attack at Natanz, and they took credit for it. So that's no conspiracy or whatever. They said that they did it, and they blew up some facilities at the electrical generation station outside. And in response to that, the Iranians began enriching up to 60%. The point of which was blatantly to try to get the then new Biden administration to get back into negotiations, to get back into the JCPOA, which is the nuclear deal of 2015 that Barack Obama had passed when Joe Biden was his right-hand man, was vice president. So they were saying, hey, this is more or less your deal. It was Blinken and Sullivan and all the same people in the Biden administration had been the same ones who negotiated the thing. And so they said, Biden had two choices. He could either go with what Trump was doing, which was the massive, which he had torn up the deal, and plus had added what they called the crippling sanctions regime on Iran, or you could go back to diplomacy. And so Biden had that choice, and he chose in 2021 to continue with Trump's belligerence rather than trying to go back to the Obama policy of negotiation. But so that was the reason for the 60%. And in fact, and this goes now to the snapback, there's a provision in the JCPOA, which, let me go back. In 2015, this JCPOA was not quite a treaty because they could not get it past 2/3 of the United States Senate, which they would need. But so what they did was they passed it as a political agreement on an international level, which is a thing, but they got the UN Security Council to stand by the whole thing. Now, in the deal, though, there was no veto power like you would normally have at the UNSC. So it was, in other words, America, Britain, and France, our allies, outnumbered China and Russia on the UNSC. So all America ever had to do was convince our allies to agree with us on any part of this deal and how it was to be implemented, whatever, and we would get our way. That was part of the deal. But when America withdrew from the deal, there was actually a part of the JCPOA that says that if America leaves the deal, then Iran is allowed to cease abiding by some of its strictures. So it doesn't say they have the right to leave the deal altogether. but they have the right to stop abiding by some of its limitations. So, in other words, when they started to enrich up to 20% again and up to then 60%, they were actually still within the JCPOA, even though they were violating some limits in it. It said they could in the event that the Americans broke the deal first, which of course Donald Trump had done in 2018, based on a bunch of Israeli propaganda about their attempt to make a nuclear bomb. And so the snapback sanctions here are now the result not of Iran really violating the JCPOA, other than in the direct aftermath of the war, kicking the IAEA inspectors out of the country for a few months. And so now they've issued these snapback sanctions, when of course the point is, if the UN Security Council, America and its allies, wanted to be charitable here, they could say, okay, well, you know what? Israel did launch an aggressive war here. And so in context, it's understandable that you would kick the inspectors out. Maybe we want them back in there as soon as possible, right? But, you know, what is implementing the snapback sanctions other than another provocation, right?
Right.
Seems like, you know, at least potentially. And then now you talk about Netanyahu's claims about intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
Well, it is true that they have launched rockets into space and I think successfully put some satellites up there. Now, I had read a thing years ago from, I think, the Federation of Atomic Scientists. I think it was, that said that, look, I know people are paranoid about this, but these rockets truly are designed to deliver payloads to space of satellites, and they're really not designed to travel, you know, in intercontinental distances to deliver weapons, and they would be designed differently if they were, et cetera. On the other hand, that's a lot of the same technology, building a three-stage rocket and being able to deliver a warhead to North America. Problem is, they don't have a nuclear bomb to marry to a three-stage missile, even if they had secretly developed one, which we have no real intelligence that says they have developed an offensive missile like that. We would know that, and we wouldn't be relying on the Israelis to let us know. That would have been, the CIA would have put that in the New York Times already if they had any inkling of that. And then secondly, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to make a miniaturized gun-type nuke, which is what they almost always make. Uranium nukes are almost always gun-type nukes, which is you take a uranium slug and you fire it down essentially a long barrel into a uranium target. And that's what causes supercritical mass. Whereas virtually all missile-delivered nuclear warheads in the world are implosion bombs, where you have multiple explosions coming in at the same time to implode a plutonium pit in order to cause a fission reaction there. And so it would be extremely unorthodox for the Iranians to figure out a way to take a uranium gun-type nuke and miniaturize it and marry it to a three-stage rocket and get it here to the United States, particularly with the U.S. not knowing that they had that capability and unable to do anything about it before it was too late. I mean, this is just comic book stuff. As we just saw, the Iranians have virtually no air defense. Israel, through their agents inside the country, through sabotage and just through intelligence gathering and through must be obviously the sloppiness of Iranian security forces. All their anti-aircraft missiles were taken out in the first few waves of attacks, and they were left helpless. America and Israel had air, not just control, but total dominance over the country, over at least most of the country. I don't know about in the places they weren't even flying, whether there were any, you know, SM-300s left up there, but they were no match for Israeli and American aircraft. They didn't even take a shot at American aircraft in June when they flew the B-2s in. So they are very overmatched and they know it. So, you know, as I've been telling people for a long time, if you discount all the Israeli propaganda about the insanity of the Ayatollah and just assume he's a normal guy trying his best to be the supreme overlord of Persia right now, what are you going to do with a problem like the United States of America? They're not going away. They got 1,500 H-bombs deployed. They rule the 7 seas and the 4 oceans. and all of international trade and all of international diplomacy, and they're in Israel's pocket and they got you in their sights, then at best, the dude abides, right? He's gonna try to survive this somehow. He doesn't have the capability to do anything, major and tricky and destructive. In fact, as Max Blumenthal pointed out on our show Provoked last night, that when Hamas launched their attack on October 7th, some of their guys got even pretty close to Tel Aviv before they were turned back. Now, if Iran had been behind that and launched a full missile salvo at Tel Aviv at that same time, and Hezbollah had jumped in with a full missile salvo at the same time, if that had all been coordinated by the Supreme Ayatollah and his insane Shiite dreams of regional revolution or whatever it is, then Israel might have really gotten hurt badly and may have had to really sue for peace on Hamas's terms, or it would have been a whole different situation. But instead, no, it was just Hamas, the local gang that rules the Israeli prison there in Gaza, broke out and caused some havoc for one day. And Iran was not in on it and was not ready for it and did not jump in to help participate in it. And nor did Hezbollah for at least, a few days until the Israelis started looking their way too. And so, the Israeli kind of narrative about Iran and their danger even to Israel, much less to everybody else in the region or the people of North America, it's all very overwrought compared to the reality. And the biggest gains that Iran has made in the last, 25 years of the century is when George W. Bush gave them Iraq, and when Barack Obama made Damascus far more dependent on them for an extra decade and a half before Damascus finally fell to al-Qaeda last December.